Hey guys, this is Aritra from GNU Linux Users Group in IT Durgapur. In this video, I'm gonna give you guys a brief intro of Linux, why you should use it and how you can customize it for your better. Now without wasting any more time, let's get started. So what actually is Linux? In order to get an idea on what Linux is, we have to go back in time of it. In the early 80s, Richard Stallman, then working in the AI lab at MIT, started the GNU project with the goal of creating an entirely free and open Unix-like operating system. By the early 90s, there was almost enough GNU softwares to build an operating system. However, the kernel that GNU was working on was not complete. Meanwhile, in the early 90s, Linus Torvalds was working to develop a Unix-like kernel known as Linux and also used several GNU softwares such as GNU C compiler to do it. As we all know, kernel on its own is pretty much useless, so he ended up using GNU softwares with Linux kernel to release an operating system. There is always a misconception regarding Linux. People often think Linux is just another operating system like Windows. Well, simply speaking, Linux is just a kernel. A kernel is a very important part of an OS but can't function on its own. That is why Linux distros are there. Now, the question is, what is a Linux distro? A Linux distribution, or simply a Linux distro, is a member of the Linux family of Unix-like operating systems, comprised of the Linux kernel and several other softwares, including GNU softwares. There are thousands of Linux distros you can actually use. Ubuntu, Kali, Arch, Linux Mint are just a few of them. If you are new to Linux, you can use Linux Mint. Linux Mint has got a desktop environment which is pretty much like Windows. It is very light and user friendly. Also, Linux Mint is very easy to install. Ubuntu is probably the most well-known Linux distro. Ubuntu is based on Debian, but it has its own software repositories. Initially, Ubuntu used GNOME desktop environment, but now it uses its own Unity desktop environment. If you are looking for a stable Linux distro, Ubuntu is the one. Kali Linux is also a Debian-based distro. It is just the reincarnation of Backtrack. In case you haven't heard any of the above names, let me tell you, Kali Linux, which was also previously known as Backtrack, is generally used for running all sorts of tests and investigations against network targets and offline local storage. It already comes preloaded with a set of network testing tools. If you are into hacking, Kali is the perfect Linux distro you have been looking for. Arch Linux is one of the champions of the rolling releases. Once you install Arch, you need not to worry about upgrading it every 6 months. With Arch, you are always running the latest package, whether it be the kernel itself or desktop environments. Moreover, almost all major desktop environments are supported in Arch Linux. In Ubuntu, at one time, you might face some problem keeping Kubuntu alongside GNOME, but in Arch, you will never ever find such problems. Arch is entirely community driven. It has its own software repository named AUR, that is Arch User Repository, which enables users to compile and install packages from the source itself. There are thousands of distros, just find out which you actually like. Now that you have learned something about Linux, a question may arise in your mind. Why Linux? First of all, it's free. Yes, you heard it right. Linux distros are actually free. From now on, you don't have to buy Windows by paying so much, nor you have to get a pirated copy of it. Just go to the official website of the distro you want to use and download it for free. Entire Linux is open source. In case if you don't know what open source is, let me tell you, open source softwares are the computer softwares whose source code is available with a license in which the copyright holder provides the right to study, change and distribute the software to anyone and for any purpose. By the way, if you're worried that you won't get Photoshop or MS Office in Linux, please don't be, because there are thousands of open source projects. You will find open source Linux alternative for every Windows application. In Linux, instead of MS Office, you get LibreOffice, which is as much useful as MS Office. VLC Media Player in Linux is an open source project and it has the capability to throw off challenge to any other Windows media player. Similarly, instead of Photoshop, you get GIMP image editor in Linux. A question might come in your mind now. What about HD games? How we are gonna play them? Attention gamers, Wine is here for you people. Using Wine, you can play almost every game or application developed for Windows. Linux is also very powerful. It can be tweaked to do a lot of things. Supercomputers are almost all Linux. Also, a majority of servers run Linux. In Linux, you get a super powerful terminal using which you can do anything you want. Using some simple commands, you can directly download softwares from its repository. All you need to know is the name of the software. If you want to update your system, you can do it through terminal itself. Unlike Windows, you can do a hell lot of things using terminal. Try it yourself. Linux is just awesome. One more reason to use Linux is it is very secure. You actually don't need to install any antivirus if you are using Linux. Linux itself is very secure. In Windows, administrator access is granted to users by default, which means that all users pretty much have access to everything on the system. As a consequence, viruses are going to have access to everything on the system too, meaning the effects could be devastating if a hacker finds a way in. Linux operates differently. Users are given lower level accounts, which means that a virus won't have root access if a Linux system is compromised, meaning the damage is lowered. Another reason why Linux is better for security is because social engineering is much more difficult to carry out in Linux. Social engineering is when worms and viruses are spread by convincing computer users to carry out an action that they shouldn't. For example, opening an attachment. The chances of this happening with a Linux system are reduced because the user would need to read the email message they received, after which the attachment would need to be saved, the user would need to grant executable permissions, and finally they would need to launch the executable. This is very unlikely. However, with Windows systems, all they need to do is open the email and click on the attachment. Linux is highly customizable. You can customize literally everything according to your needs. There are thousands of distros to choose from. You can even customize the desktop environment in Linux. There are various popular and beautiful desktop environments available. For example, Pantheon, XFCE, Cinnamon, Genome, and many more. You can also customize or mod Windows Manager, Desktop Manager, themes, and everything else, ranging from copying speed to system update time. Linux in all way is better than Windows. Thanks people for watching this video, and please do not forget to check out other videos released by our group. Bye bye.